Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
My name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den here in the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely and utterly surrounded by my stuff, including a bunch of off-the-shelf cold remedies. Here on my right is the great library of RPGs and my Grognard Files. I have a couple of back issues that I'm about to refer to, and here on my left is the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah, yes. This time she's appeared as Laura Bellows from Dracula AD 1972, otherwise known as the Satanic Rites of Dracula. For the second time on the bounce, the Eternal Champion makes his appearance as we're being satanic in this episode. We are looking at the Satanic Panic. More accurately, it should be referred as the Satanic Panics, as according to our special guest, Joseph Laycock, there were 3 waves of the moral panic around Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing in general, from the 1970s through to the 1990s. His book, Dangerous Games, examines the history and sociology of the moral panics. It's very good, and the best RPG fan study that I've read so far. We touched on this topic previously when we had the journalist and economist Tim Harford on the podcast. He spoke to us about how the private detective William Deere sensationalised the tragic story of James Dallas Edberg in the book The Dungeon Master. The Edberg case also inspired the 1982 made-for-TV film Mazes and Monsters, which was based on a novel. I'm joined in the room of role-playing rambling by our resident rules lawyer, Blythy. We've watched the film for the Grogglebox. We reflect that our interest in role-playing games back in the day was met with more of a milder bemusement rather than a panic. Perhaps it's because we were part of the Scarred for Life generation, see episode 54. Our parents were inured to the effects of devils on the books we were buying. It's a natural progression to go from horror bags and Dracula lollies to asking for RuneQuest's Cults of Terror for Christmas. We were relatively unscathed. However, distinguished member of the Grog Squad, Clarky the Cruel, aka Kehaar, formerly of the Dissecting Worlds podcast, was a subject of controversy in his hometown back in the late 80s. He's here to tell his story and to tell us about his Doctor Who unit campaign, which he has put into the Appendix G. He has to use the safe word fishfinger when things get too much. We've got a bit of closing time chatter before we head for the door. I'll be back at the end to say goodbye, but until then, ramblers, let's get rambling. Open box!
Joining me in the room of role-playing rambling is academic, gamer, and author of Dangerous Games, What Moral Panic Over Role-Playing Games Says About Play, Religion, and Imagined Worlds. Joseph Laycock. Hello there, Joe.
Thanks so much for having me.
Looking forward to this. So, where in the world are you beaming from?
I am in Austin, Texas at the moment.
And you've got an unusual weather event today.
That's right. I would normally be in San Marcos, Texas, teaching classes at university, but the roads are all shut down today due to freezing rain all over the highways. So I'm safe at home instead.
Religious studies, isn't it, that you teach there?
That's right. Yeah, I'm a professor of religious studies.
What's interesting is you produced this book, and you're a gamer, and it's very much from the idea of a participant observer because normally these books are from people who know nothing about the hobby. Tell us something about your experience and how you got into the hobby, because you cover it really well in the book.
Sure. So I grew up here in Texas in the 1980s, playing mostly second edition Dungeons and Dragons. Texas is part of the Bible Belt. There's a big evangelical culture here. And so very early on, I encountered people who said, this is a satanic hobby, right? That step one is you start rolling some dice, and then step 2 or 3 is you begin worshiping Satan and committing suicide. And as a young boy, this was kind of my first inkling that adults act like they have all the answers and they know what they're talking about, but actually they don't, because how could anyone possibly think these things about this game? And so this book that I wrote after getting my PhD and having studied the sociology of religion is really an attempt to think about, out of all the social or political issues that conservative Christians could have been upset about in the 1980s, why focus on this fairly obscure game that was being marketed especially to children in the 1980s, right? And to gifted middle school and elementary school children. So that was sort of what initially sparked the idea for the book.
And you're a gamer yourself, so how did you get into the hobby?
Right. I think I started so young, it's almost hard to remember. But I was marked early on as a gifted child. I remember going at a very young age to a summer camp that was nominally for gifted children. This was something that everybody was interested in, and I'm talking about very young children, maybe as young as 5. But even if we didn't exactly know how to play Dungeons and Dragons, because the rules are quite complicated, especially in second edition, we had older brothers and things who had these books with these amazing pictures that we would bring to the camp and look at. And eventually we kind of graduated from sort of half playing it to actually understanding the rules and playing properly. And now there is a faculty game at Texas State University where we continue to play.
Right, so he's still playing to this day, because we stopped playing at the end of the 80s. And I know that you were playing Vampire the Masquerade, weren't you, through the 90s?
That's right. So as I got older, by the time I was in high school, White Wolf Games had produced the World of Darkness games, which were significantly sort of darker and grittier than Dungeons and Dragons, and they had created live action role-playing games. So these were actually sort of acted out in a way, instead of played sitting around a table. And those went on at the local university in Austin. I think the games began at 8 p.m. and went until 2 a.m. So you really did feel like a vampire by the time the game was over. And I was, you were supposed to be 18 to play. I had to lie. I was too young to play. I was only 17. But hanging out with these college students dressed as vampires until 2 a.m, I felt really important. It's like nobody else in my high school knows how cool I am or what I did this weekend, which is interesting because I think a lot of people who play these hobbies usually feel kind of socially inferior to other people, but I felt very superior having been up late with these college students.
What struck me about your book, which is a really good sociology of the gaming hobby and sets a context, is there isn't really a moral panic. There is actually 3 stages to it, as you describe it. So just describe how you have kind of framed this in the book.
Sure. So my area of expertise within religious studies is a field called New Religious Movements. New Religious Movements includes groups that the media often refers to as cults. So this is a rather problematic category, but it can include any group that the public or the majority is sort of afraid of or wary about or stigmatizes, either with good reason or not. Of course, some religious groups actually are dangerous. Others are stigmatized unfairly. But in the United States, there was a real panic about these groups in the 1970s. And there were several factors in that. One was changes to immigration laws in the 1960s, which had allowed groups like the Unification Church, the so-called Moonies, to arrive, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or the Hare Krishnas, to arise. And then these groups were gathering baby boomer generation college students who were converting these religions. And at the same time, there was this discourse about brainwashing, which was a product of the Korean War and sort of used to explain American prisoners of war who said they didn't want to come back to the United States, that they had learned to love communism while imprisoned in Korea. And so this notion formed that strange religions have the power to brainwash people and basically make them almost mentally dominated by a leader. And so Dungeons and Dragons was published in 1974, and this panic over cults became the framework through which people interpreted this. And when they heard things like there is a dungeon master who runs the game, that was seen as a type of cult leader. And so the literature sort of uses this narrative of the cults and brainwashing to understand the game. By the 1980s, it was pretty clear that Hare Krishnas were not going to take over the United States, that these groups were not really a threat. But then we had moved into what's now remembered as the Satanic Panic. And this is the phase that you can see in media like Stranger Things. So these unusual religious groups at least existed. These satanic cults described in these conspiracy theories did not exist. And so one of the pieces of evidence used by the claims makers was this game is used to basically seduce children into becoming Satanists. And if you don't believe us, just look at the covers of these books. Look at how scary they are. They describe things like demons. They talk about hell. And then the third phase of this was in the 1990s. And by the 1990s, there was still a fear that adolescents were dangerous. But now there was this discourse of so-called super predators. And there was a book called Body Count, which basically said that the United States had raised a generation of adolescents that basically didn't have a conscience, that basically had to be sort of imprisoned and taken away from society. And this was a time when cities began passing curfew laws that people who were not 18 could not legally be on the street after a certain hour at night. In the 1996 presidential election, both candidates vowed that they would protect the United States from the super predators. And so the panic about Dungeons and Dragons was not as strong as it had been by the 80s, but now it fell into this narrative of our adolescents are just sort of monsters. And so when the Columbine shootings happened in 1999, that sort of began the current era of mass shootings, one of the first things that was pointed to explain why this happened was Dungeons and Dragons, right? That if a teenager did something inexplicably violent, this game must have something to do with it. So we're looking at one long panic, but the sort of mythology around the panic changes with the times.
Yeah, and it usually does coalesce around an incident, doesn't it? So in that first stage, the famous Dallas Egbert case was the focus of it, and then in the 80s, it's the Irving case. I'm familiar with the Egbert case, but all the story around Bad was fascinating. Now that emerged.
Sure. So very briefly with Dallas Egbert, and it sounds like a lot of your listeners may already be familiar with this. This was a student who disappeared in college. His parents were wealthy and hired this very eccentric private detective named William Deere, who began researching this boy and realized that he'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons, and also was considered a prodigy. Was designing computers and had started a college at only 16 and so forth. And he has a press conference and tells everyone, I think that this child has entered this sort of dissociative state where they believe that they are living in a fantasy game, and they went into the steam tunnels underneath the university and are sort of wandering around somewhere thinking that they are, a magic user or something like this. None of this was true. William Deere did not help find this boy. This boy simply called his parents from New Orleans. And unfortunately did commit suicide not long after that. This boy was gay at a time when that was not at all acceptable in American society, was manufacturing drugs. So there were all kinds of other factors, but everyone sort of homed in on Dungeons and Dragons. This is actually very good for sales of the game because rumors got out that this game is so intense to play that it can cause literal sort of dissociative states. And this story that William Deere told everyone at this press conference became the basis of a novel called Mazes and Monsters that was adapted into a made-for-TV film starring a young Tom Hanks. And so you can see Tom Hanks wandering around New York, believing that he is a cleric. The second case occurred in Virginia in the 1980s with a troubled young man named Irving. Bink was his nickname, Irving Pulling. He committed suicide, and his mother, Patricia Pulling, came to believe that he committed suicide because of playing Dungeons and Dragons, which he was playing as part of his honors English program. And so she started a group called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, and really kind of led the charge in vilifying this game with a lot of, frankly, dishonest propaganda, saying that the game was responsible for all sorts of suicides and deaths. And in the 1980s, she became a sort of leading speaker of the Satanic Panic. So by the end of her career, police would hold these seminars on so-called occult crime, and they would pay Patricia Pulling to come in and say basically untruthful information, misinformation about things like satanic crime. So there was a newspaper interview I found where she said that 8% of the population of Richmond, Virginia are Satanists. And the reporter asked, how are you getting that number? Because that means there are more Satanists than there are Methodists or many other sort of mainstream churches. And she answered, well, 4% of the children are Satanists and 4% of the adults are Satanists. And that adds up to 8% of the population. So she would say things like this all the time. But I think the appeal of her story came, her appeal came to the story of, I'm this bereaved mother, right? This game stole my boy from me. And that sort of was more persuasive to people than any of these kinds of made-up statistics. While researching this book, I was able to find some more information out about what happened to Irving Pulling. I spoke to someone who knew him and said that probably he only played Dungeons and Dragons for about 5 hours in his entire life because there wasn't much time to do this. That the campaign had involved someone cursing his character with lycanthropy. And there was sort of the dungeon master had created this kind of prop where there's a running poem about, in the full moon, you will become a slayer of men or something like this. And the story that Patricia Pulling sort of wove out of this was this game had basically mentally programmed my son to murder his entire family. And again, this goes back to the Korean War. A product of the Korean War was the novel and film The Manchurian Candidate, where it's possible to program someone with hypnosis to carry out a hypnotic assassination. And she said that instead of following through on this sort of suggestion that the game had given him, his only alternative was to commit suicide. And so really, she claimed, my son didn't commit suicide at all. My son martyred himself to save our family, right, from this game. People who knew Bink Pulling said that he was very troubled, that both of his parents were having affairs, that he was angry at them, and that he had shot himself using his mother's handgun on the front porch and sort of arranged this death scene in a way so that when his mother came home and came around the bend of their driveway, she would find this scene. So it's understandable why Patricia Pulling would prefer to believe this other story. The other detail was the Committee for the Advancement of Role-Playing Games got a copy of Bink's character sheet. And the second edition character sheet has a square where you can draw an insignia of your character. That had been erased, but you could see faint traces of a swastika in that box. And Patricia Pulling was Jewish, at least Jewish by heritage, if not by practice. So that suggests that this is a troubled young man, right? Prior to the suicide, but as I mentioned, the story became kind of foundational to this sort of crusade against Dungeons and Dragons that took shape in the 1980s.
A remarkably well organized although short-lived campaign as well. I think that's what struck me about how you give an account of it, how it, as you say, infiltrated the police and schools.
That's right. One of the things that Patricia Pulling did, which again the Committee for the Advancement of Role-Playing Games uncovered, was she created these questions for interrogating young men who played Dungeons and Dragons. And initially, the police denied that such a document existed, and it finally took a police officer who was a gamer to kind of leak this to prove that it did in fact exist. But the questions, again, were both sort of tragic and laughable. But one of the questions was, have you ever read the Necronomicon? Right, which is, any gamer knows, is a fictional book. There are sort of hoaxes purporting to be the Necronomicon. Another one said you have to identify who the dungeon master is. And again, this is going back to this notion of the cult leader. But it said that, you know, if the players say we take turns being the dungeon master, they're lying to protect the true dungeon master, right? You have to keep pressing until you figure out who it is. I have no idea how often this list of questions was asked to, you know, young suspects by police, maybe even never. But I cannot imagine being arrested for some minor offense and then being asked by a police officer if I've read the Necronomicon, and how confusing that must have been for young people.
Also, in the 90s, there was some cases as well, wasn't there, that the panic kind of coalesced around?
That's right. So by the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons had become a kind of go-to excuse if there was any sort of violence that did not have a plausible explanation. And Patricia Pulling was happy to go to murder trials as an expert witness. Because expert witnesses are paid very well for their services, and would say in pretty much any crime, this person isn't responsible. This game sort of warped their mind. And so in the 1990s, there was a case that was called the Bellevue Massacre, which happened up in Washington State. And these two young men committed a series of murders, basically attacked an entire family. And the defense that they attempted was, I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was my character. One of them, their characters had the ridiculous name of Slicer Thunderclap, and said, it wasn't me who did this. It was Slicer Thunderclap sort of taking over my mind. And then after a jury did not buy that, the Dungeons & Dragons defense never, ever worked. It never got anyone off of a crime they had committed. The defendant admitted, of course, Dungeons & Dragons had nothing to do with this, but I had nothing else that I could do to try to exonerate myself. So those kinds of talking points and arguments continued throughout the 1990s.
Yeah, and you give a good account of, as you said, this idea of super predators and how the world of darkness kind of factored into that.
That's right. I mean, Gary Gygax and David Arneson tried very hard to make a game that would sort of stave off these accusations of being dark and satanic. At one point, they experimented with a set of guidelines that said things like, basically, evil cannot win in Dungeons and Dragons, right? The good guys have to always win, and so forth. And the World of Darkness game, which started in 1991, when there was less pressure on them from these Christian groups, and also they were marketing their game to the college students. They were marketing to a very different clientele. But they decided to have much darker games based largely on the vampire fiction of Anne Rice. And so they really leaned into this is sort of a dark, scary world. It's a dangerous world. Things like guns and murder and drug abuse and even sexual abuse are going on everywhere. But it did seem to sort of strangely mirror the narrative of the super predators, which was this idea that our society is fallen. Our society has become decadent and amoral. So in a strange way, and by the way, in the 1990s, crime rates were falling in every city in America. So it was not like we were living through this terrible crime wave. It was quite the opposite. So you had, in a way, two kind of fantasies of a dark, failed American civilization. One going on as a fantasy in the world of darkness, and then another one being discussed by politicians.
And going back to Hansen and Gygax, you make the point, don't you, that in the context of their generation, wargaming and playing games was a way of responding to Vietnam and creating a safer environment for their imaginations to construct a reality.
So this 1970s are remembered as an era of great cynicism, when Americans sort of lost faith in all of their institutions because of the Vietnam War, which Americans were watching every night on television, and most Americans could not understand what we were doing over there. In addition to that, you had the Watergate scandal, which caused Americans to lose faith in the government and the president. You had the shooting of protesters at Kent State University. So there was this real melange of cynicism. And I think one outcome of that was an idea to escape into a kind of imagined past. So while all this bad stuff was happening, you had the beginning of Dungeons and Dragons. You had the beginning of Renaissance festivals, right, where people would act like they lived. Well, they would say is the Middle Ages as they should have been. So these people were not necessarily detailed historians, but they wanted to kind of escape from a contemporary civilization. And in some of the discourse that I found from the 1970s, one of the discussions of Dungeons and Dragons was, can we make rules for guns in a fantasy world like Dungeons and Dragons? And one person wrote back and said, absolutely not. I see guns every night when I turn on the news and watch soldiers in Vietnam. I want a game that is as far removed from that as possible. So I think for a lot of people, that was what was fueling this escape into fantasy, into reading Tolkien, which was very popular beginning in the 1960s and so forth, was a kind of politics of nostalgia and a hope to kind of escape from modernity, as it were.
Yeah, and you extend this into this idea of you mentioned a sacred canopy. So you extend this kind of thesis that actually, far from being satanic activity, it's actually a very religious experience.
So, a dirty secret of religious studies is that we don't actually know what religion is. We know what Christianity is and Islam is and so forth. But as far as what actually makes something a religion or not, there's many different theories. And that's part of the fun of being a religious studies professor, is you have this different toolkit of theories that you can define religion with. A theorist who's not very popular anymore, but who I use in the book, is Mircea Eliade. And Eliade believed that religion is about, in essence, nostalgia, all right? An idea that the world that we live in today is sort of very confusing and not very satisfying to live in. But at some point in the past, there was a golden age, right? And if we can sort of somehow return ourselves to that time, we will be happy. And Eliade believed that that's what religious ritual was doing. That when a community gets together and they hold a sacred ritual, they are making their sacred time sort of present, at least temporarily. So Eliade would say that when Christians enact the Eucharist, they are sort of ritually connecting to the time of Jesus and the Last Supper, and that kind of experience is nourishing. So I think this is an interesting framework for thinking about role-playing games where you have a group of people and they have some kind of imagined world that is maybe not better than our world, but sort of more meaningful, more exciting, has kind of higher stakes. And through this kind of ritualistic behavior, and it's ritualistic in the sense of it has, rules and protocols that are different from our ordinary world, they're able to create this kind of intense experience. So my argument is not that Dungeons and Dragons is a religion, but if you compare these two things, you maybe notice and appreciate things about what happens when you play Dungeons and Dragons that you wouldn't maybe notice unless you were comparing it to a religious ritual.
It certainly helps to explain the phenomenon that I've experienced over the last 5 years of creating a podcast and building a community of players from the 80s, and that idea of collective nostalgia and rediscovering that nostalgia through having mini conventions and playing games together and restoring some of those connections we had when we were younger had a resonance to me, using that kind of analogy that you give.
Yeah, I think that human beings are sort of hardwired for community, and that our ordinary daily interactions with each other are kind of focused on means and ends, right? We are customers and consumers most of the time. And so we need some other mode of interaction, whether that's a religious community or athletics or something like role-playing games, to kind of bring about that different set of interactions. And so one of the sets of theories I looked at a lot in the book is ludology, or the study of play. And arguments that sort of play is very important for generating human communities and also for generating a culture. So this is something, again, that we see in both role-playing games and also in religious communities.
And what about the context of now? Do you think that there is potential for more moral panic, because the role-playing hobby is probably as mainstream now as it's ever been? Do you think that there's still potential for a moral panic to emerge?
I mean, on the one hand, I look around and I think I can now watch all kinds of celebrities play Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube. The sort of profile of a gamer has changed completely, where in the 80s it was sort of primarily socially awkward boys, right? And now I teach at a college, and I have seen very socially advanced, conventionally attractive sorority girls saying, I've thought about playing D&D. Everyone else is doing it, and I don't want to be left out. That could be more different from the 80s. At the same time, as a religious studies scholar, I'm very aware of discourse within evangelical communities, and I'm still surprised when I see claims that this is a satanic game. I have seen videos of conservative Christians sort of walking through a bookstore and pointing at all the books on witchcraft and saying, and this is right next to the books about Dungeons and Dragons, and what further evidence do I need that it's evil if it's near the Dungeons and Dragons aisle? And I'm also very concerned about the rise of things like QAnon. All right, QAnon and claims that Tom Hanks, who I already mentioned in this interview, is hurting children to harvest adrenochrome from their blood. These theories are ridiculous. Adrenochrome can be cheaply manufactured in a laboratory for a few pennies. But this shows that there's still really an appetite for these kinds of really dark fantasies. And some people have even said the participation of QAnon on the internet actually resembles a game. It has been kind of gamified, where people will say things like, several items in this furniture catalog are actually codes for trafficking children. Can you figure out which items in the catalog are secret codes? And so one of the conclusions I have in the book is I think people have this need to live in a more exciting world. I wish that all of these people playing the QAnon game right now, sort of building up these horrible conspiracy theories, would play Dungeons and Dragons instead. Right, because then they could get the sense of being a crusader against evil in a way that is healthy and doesn't result in actual violence, which unfortunately things like QAnon is contributing to right now.
Well, thank you, Joe. And before we go, on a lighter note, so tell us about the current game that you're playing.
Well, we finished a game that took over 2 years to complete. It was led by a DM from the history department. It was great having an interfaculty game, actually. We had a physicist who was our wizard and so forth. And my wife wanted to play a dwarf priest. And so I made a dwarf fighter who was her bodyguard. And that was a fun game that lasted for about 2 years. And now I've been asked to DM the next game. And we decided to make a game with monks. The monk class has always been this very strange a thing. It never really fit into the world, so we decided to make an entire campaign where everyone must be a monk. And so it's going to be a kind of a mashup of sort of tropes from kung fu movies and things like that. And we'll see if people have fun with that or not.
That sounds excellent. Well, thank you very much, Joe, for spending the time with us. That's great.
This has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Grogglebox! Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling. I've got Blythy with me.
Hello, Dirk.
And the wigs are off. I've kind of forgotten why we say that now.
Where's the wigs?
It's
wigs. Are wigs off that we're not in a pub?
Yeah, I think.
Or is it the other way around?
I think we put wigs on because of going into a pub.
Yeah, you'd put a wig on because you're in a public space.
That's
you'd
the
wear
idea,
your wig, wouldn't you? Like you're going out.
And we haven't been to the pub for a while, have we? I mean,
no, it's overdue.
So there's no pub noise. In fact, it's very quiet in the store cupboard.
Very eerily quiet in the cupboard, the store cupboard at work.
You might hear the distant rumble of air conditioning. Last time, I turned it off, right?
Yeah.
Which is a cardinal sin, isn't it? Touching the air conditioning in this building.
Did you get in trouble?
Well, I turned it off. And apparently it affects the third floor.
Did you turn the whole town, the whole town hall? The whole building off.
I came in and there were 3 blokes, with spanners on belts. And
3 of them?
Yeah. The tiles were off and he said, have you reported the problem with the air conditioning? And I went, no, not me, no. Yeah, apparently, me switching it off, we cocked it all up. So
what? So you broken it?
I've broken it.
You didn't say to the 3 blokes, I haven't touched it, but looking at this, I think it's switched off. I think some idiot switched it off. But it was worse than that. By switching it off, you broken it.
Yeah, I've broken it. You had to replace something. It can't be me. They can't put the finger on me. Can't put the
How
finger.
sensitive are these things?
Anyway, enough of that. We're here to talk about the moral panic, the satanic panic, how they see us, isn't it? That's what it is, really.
Yeah.
How the others see us.
How the others see us.
Yeah.
How they view us as role players. Yeah. Or did. Or maybe still do.
We're going to talk about mazes and monsters, but before we do that, it might be worthwhile just thinking about our own memories of satanic panic, because I can't remember very much. I can't remember it being much of an issue.
No, I don't think it was. I think we wanted it to be, because I quite like the idea of being seen as a Satanist, but I don't think people did.
No,
I don't think people did. I think there was a little bit of people looked at you in a funny way. They definitely thought you were strange if you played role-playing game. That was my memory of it. The view that you were, it was a really weird thing to do. And I know to some extent that still exists a little bit. It's still in some circles viewed as a strange thing to do. You get the old, oh, would you dress up? You get that, don't you? I still get that dress up. To which I say, yes, I do. I say I do now. I say I wear a wizard's hat. I don't care. Do you remember in English?
Yeah.
You had to do a talk, didn't you? I think Americans would call it show and tell thing, didn't they?
Yeah,
you had to do a talk. And I did it one year on role-playing games. And I still have a vivid memory of how dreadful an experience that was, where I was explaining role-playing games to the class, the English teacher, and it was a sea of confused faces.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them really understood what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And that's probably more to do with me than them. But of course, it was that problem, wasn't it? To me, now, at that point, it all made sense, didn't it? We've been playing these games for a few years, and it was all dead straightforward. It's obvious what you do. But I remember being looked at in a really strange way, and there'd be an awkward silence at the end of the class, and it was just like a weird experience. So I think it was more about being viewed as very, very strange, as if what you were doing was very strange. Not so much the moral panic that you hear about in other people's kind of tell tales, don't they? Particularly in America, I think, with the moral panic. I don't think it was a moral panic. I think it was just, what on earth are you doing? Yeah, you weirdo.
It's not meant to a panic, that, is it?
It's not a panic. It's just mildly puzzled. Mildly puzzled.
But so that's it. That's the end of
I wish they did. I wish they had thought I was a Satanist. That would have been fantastic. I mean, so exciting, wouldn't it? But they didn't. I don't think they did.
There's two incidents I can think of where we touched on the satanic panic and the moral panic. The first one, and I think I've recounted both of these tales previously. The first one was when I'd started the postal game. It coincided with me ordering some books from a book club, a mysteries book club, and they arrived at my nan's, and they were like tarot cards and some, other weird things, and all these envelopes started coming through the door as well daily. And my dad said, "Are you starting a cult?" And that I've told that story before. Yeah. And the other time was the time when we were at college together, media studies course, and we were interviewed, weren't we, about role-playing games.
Oh, we were, weren't we?
Ray Godwin.
Right, yeah.
He professed to be interested in our hobby and to discover more, didn't he?
Yeah, he wasn't though.
No.
We were taken in a bit, weren't we, by that?
Yeah.
Foolishly keen to talk about it to anyone who would listen.
Yeah.
That was the thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. We do, have swords and little battles, and we had this. And what he did, Ray Godwin, is he put a red filter on us, did a thing called Devil's Games, where he cut, didn't he? Cut to people doing mazes and monsters kind of thing, didn't he? Yeah. Where they were going into like a mysterious wasteland.
Yeah.
While we were saying, and then you can die. Yeah, you can actually die.
Yeah. That's right, he did. To be clear, this was like a college project, wasn't it? So it wasn't a thing that was broadcast. That gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? That people thought it was an odd hobby. They didn't quite understand it. Oh, they thought it was silly. They thought it was daft. People thought it was daft, didn't they? So it was arranged things like that. People didn't really think you were a threat or anything like that, or in danger in some way. But that college project sort of tapped into the way the media wanted to portray it like that, didn't they?
Yes.
The media wanted to portray it like that, even though most people didn't view it like that.
Yeah.
Ignore this. It's a rug covering a hole.
So, Mazes and Monsters. I seem to remember that we watched this at your house. I can't remember whether it was a planned viewing or whether your mum came in and, they're talking about the games you play.
I think it was planned. I think it was a planned viewing. Was it either on video or was it on the telly?
It was on the telly, I think.
Telly, yeah. I think it was a planned thing. We knew about Mazes and Monsters. My memory of it is we knew about it, and we knew that it was part of this kind of satanic panic thing. So we watched it with a kind of a sort of severe judgment, didn't we? We said, "Oh well, we'll see what this rubbish is," that kind of thing. And it is. Let's face it, it is rubbish.
Yeah, it is rubbish.
But perhaps for different reasons than the reasons. So I've never seen it twice. I saw it then, and we rewatched it. So I've never seen it in between time, for good reasons, because it's rubbish. But I think we watched it with a view to saying, "Oh well, this film's all about this satanic panic." Again, going back to what I said earlier, that the idea that the media was portraying it like this in this really negative way, and this Mazes and Monsters was all part of that.
Yeah. And I think I got the book from the library. It must have been after seeing it. And I think that just came out of that desire just to read about it, because, as we said before, you couldn't really find a lot of information about role-playing games. So in the library, they only had two things. They had Mazes and Monsters. They had the Holmes book on role-playing games, which I used to take out, but it had like a horrible smell. It used to smell, some of those books that smell of sick.
We've been borrowed by other people. What have they done with it?
Yeah. So rather than have that one, I read Mazes and Monsters, and it felt pretty lame at the time. But I was kind of caught up with the idea of trying to work out what kind of game it was, and working out whether it was a real thing that you could buy and that kind of thing.
Well, I remember when we watched it the first time, we were quite indignant about it, quite annoyed about it. So there is a scene, for example. I think we're annoyed about it at 2 levels. One, because we watched it, when we originally watched it, we took it or interpreted it that, oh, I see. So if you play what you're saying here, filmmakers, is if you play role-playing games, you'll be driven insane and really will think that you're a cleric. Because it's a cleric as well, isn't it? Tom Hanks, he's the one who goes mad, and he thinks he's a cleric, he's a real cleric. I rest my case. He's a cleric. It's always the cleric, isn't it? Terrible. But there was that side of it, I think, where we thought, well, it's this terrible film is portraying it in that way. And the other issue, I think, was sometimes when they were playing the game, which isn't really like a role-playing game, we'd look at it and think, what are they playing? Yeah, what are they doing? Because there's a scene where he says, oh, you come to a pit. And there's a guy who wears funny hats, isn't it? He says,
we'll come on to him
my character jumps into the pit. And then he said, the games master says, oh, well, it's full of spikes. And you die. And they all go, oh, this is terrible. He's died. And you think, what's this bullshit? Let's don't play it like that. And I remember sitting there in my mum's front room thinking, what are they doing? You don't do it like that. I mean, not only were you unfairly criticising the games, but you're actually portraying them. That's not what you do. Yeah. You don't even do that. Where's the rolls? Where are the hit points? Where's all the stuff?
I think you'll find that Amazing Monsters is an early example of an indie game.
Narrative indie game.
Yeah.
It's like 7.3 second edition. No one rolls a dice because no one knows what the hell they're doing. Is that? Right, okay.
It's one of those. Yeah, the book is by Rona Jaffe. I suppose it's in that tradition of the 70s thrillers like Michael Crichton and Robin Cook. Those are ripped from the headlines type things.
Yes.
You know, she took the Dallas Egbert case and turned it into a story. But she's like, her background was lifestyle magazine. She wrote for Cosmo. So... And you can see that, innit, Guy? You can see that depiction of New York middle classes.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? It's essentially the plot is some college kids who come across as quite wealthy. I mean, most of them look like they're about 36, to be fair. But they're quite wealthy college kids as well, aren't they? Yes. They are, and by anyone's standards, you know, they're like you say, a cosmopolitan kind of wealthy college kids who play this game.
And the hint that they are geniuses.
Yeah, they're all very clever and successful, aren't they?
Yeah. That, you know, really, you should be going to MIT.
Yeah, that's right.
They go into this fictional college out of town, unspecified.
Which leads to a very funny scene, actually, isn't it? Where they go to see Tom Hanks, who's gone mad. And the other three are in the car. They talk about their futures that they're planning, about being a famous writer or a famous movie director. It's ironic that those 3 actors, never heard of them again. The one who really became famous is the mad cleric, Tom Hanks. There you go. How ironic. Quite a funny scene, that, I think. But yeah, that's the way it's kind of depicted, and they play this game, don't they? And then eventually they decide to go LARPing, don't they? They don't refer to it as LARPing, but they decide to go LARPing in a cave and do it, and dress up, wear funny hats, dress up, and do that. And that seems to be, the film seems to imply that's what drives Tom Hanks over the edge into this kind of delusional state where he thinks he is this cleric looking for something called the Great, Great Hall, isn't it? There's some...
Yeah. And it's great. We'll perhaps go into a bit more detail of it, but I think, you know, we both concluded after seeing the film and me returning to the book that it's not really a moral panic at all, is it?
No.
It is trying to say something about self-actualization and the fact that if you've got everything provided for you and all you've got is your own self-identity, self-advancement, it is going to be appealing that these games are very absorbing, and it's a way of realising and creating agency for yourself. but also there's a form of madness if you become self-obsessed.
Well, it does say those kind of things, but I think you're doing it too much of a favour there, really. If I'm honest with you, I think you're giving it too much credit. I don't think it really does, to some extent, but really what it's about is someone's trauma and mental breakdown. So Tom Hanks's character has this issue, doesn't he, where his brother, his older brother, is it an older brother?
He's gone missing.
He says his story at the beginning where the older brother, who was called Hall, his first name was Hall, disappears. One day he just ups and goes and they don't know where he is. And this has been very traumatic for Tom Hanks' character.
Yeah, and it appears in his dreams, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Down the barrel of a gun like James Bond, doesn't it?
Right, yeah.
But in jogging bottoms.
Yeah. So he goes looking for this great Hall. And obviously it's his brother. He's looking for his brother, but it's all got confused and the game's kind of... But you sort of think, well, it is a dreadful film, but from a production point of view, it's naff soundtrack, some naff acting, naff script, rubbish. But all it really seems to be rewatching it now compared to when we watched it as kids. You look at it and think, as you rightly said, the game's neither here nor there, really. It's just about someone's breakdown, and the game is like a way of him dealing with it in some way. That's essentially, it's about trauma, mental illness, and that's it. That's what it's really about. It doesn't really criticise. Well, it does criticise the games, right? It's kind of funny scene, isn't it? Because the guy who plays the mayor in Jaws is in it.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? Yeah.
He's in it, and he's more worried about these games than he is about a killer shark. So he's got his priorities wrong to start with, hasn't he? Yeah. He's quite happy to open the beach in Jaws, but he's worried about kids playing a game. You need to reevaluate that. But anyway, there's some funny scenes where he's a journalist, isn't he?
He's a
policeman, a journalist. He's a policeman.
I'm not sure.
It's not quite clear that.
Yeah.
But what happens in it is, it's almost like they forget about the idea that these games are sinister and a bad influence. It doesn't really push that idea at all. But every now and again they have to shoehorn it in, don't they? So there's a scene where the mayor from Jaws says to this lad, these games you play, poisoning people, stabbing people, killing people, and the guy says, yeah, they're just games. And the mayor from Jaws says, are they? Are they? And it cuts to another scene, as if they've shoehorned that in, because at some point during the shooting of the film, they've thought, we're not really pushing the idea these games are sinister, are we? We need to put a scene in, get the mayor from Jaws in to say these games are dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's faintly ridiculous.
There is something to do with the pacing of the film, because there is quite a bit of filler in it. And I think the guy who directed it, that Stephen Hillard Stern, he was like just a television movie director. It's quite perfunctory, isn't it, how it's done? Yeah. And I watched the Blu-ray version, and it's really dark. You couldn't really see what was going on. So you're right, it is, by any measure, a terrible film.
Yeah.
But I do think the novel is trying to get at something a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe it's a good film trying to get out. I don't know. It could be, but... Yeah.
I did afterwards think, maybe because it had Tom Hanks in it, I did think, I wonder what Steven Spielberg would make of this. Because it is his kind of thing of, a fantasy, and the distinction between fantasy and reality blaring. And
I tell you what's I thought about watching it. I thought about Stranger Things and how that's an interesting development, isn't it? That Stranger Things, they play D&D, and the kids in Stranger Things interpret this world through D&D, don't they?
Yeah.
But it's not viewed as madness. It's viewed as, obviously, it's a science fiction thing where there really are monsters. Yeah. It's kind of interesting split, isn't there, between this film, Amazing Monsters, about role playing, but actually someone's gone mad. There are no real monsters. He's just got mad. Yeah. And Stranger Things, where they play D&D, and in a way, that fantasy world is reflected in the real world.
Yes.
As a real thing. There is a demagogue, as in there is this terrible monster. Yeah. So It's odd, isn't it, that that's a modern take on D&D is a much more, is positive the right word, I don't know, but less judgmental view of D&D.
Yeah.
Whereas Mazes and Monsters is trying to be judgmental, although, mind you, I don't think it really is.
No.
I think we viewed it that way as kids. I think we thought, this is terrible, what are they saying? Yeah. But when you watch it again with an adult's eye, they're not. I think they want to say that it's a terrible game, but they don't really achieve it, because it doesn't come across like that at all, does it? Doesn't.
Let's go into a little bit more detail. I don't want to go blow by blow with this.
Good.
If you want to listen to a commentary, you get the BluRay. It's got Scott Dorwood from Good Friends of Jackson Alliance in it, Seth Skorkowsky, and the guys from How We Roll podcast doing a commentary of it. So they'll do a much better job than...
Mind you, I have to watch it again, don't I?
Yeah.
Three's one too many.
You're pushing it.
You're pushing it up there.
I just wanted to talk about that setup and the characters now they're introduced and the actual game. And then we could just talk about some of the incidents that lead, it goes through. So the thing is that you get an insight into this world that they come from, don't you, of New York. And the first character we meet is wearing a German helmet with a spike. What they call those? I do not. What
German helmet with a spike. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Some wargamer will write in and tell us. Yeah. I don't know what they're called. But anyway, he is. Yeah, and he's a character who he's not the games master, is he? But he seems the keenest on the whole thing.
He's the convener, isn't he?
He's the convener.
He's a bit like me, isn't he? A bit obsessed.
A
bit like, right, come on, when we play.
You wear funny hats as well.
Yeah. I wear funny hats.
You like a funny hat, don't you?
Yeah. People make a great big deal about the number of hats he wears because he wears a different hat.
There's a different hat in every scene, yeah.
But there's only 5. I got counted 5.
There's only 5 hats.
Yeah, that's not a lot of hats really, because they kind of.
It's not a lot of hats, but some of them are questionable. I mean, the German army with the spike is clearly saying, I'm an eccentric, right? Fair enough, you're eccentric. And then I think there's another scene where he's wearing a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And you think, it's America, people wear cowboy hats, so that's not that weird.
A pith helmet as well.
But there's a pith helmet, all right, that's eccentric. There's one where he's wearing a builder's helmet, he's wearing a yellow builder's helmet. That just looks rubbish, because that's not that eccentric, that just looks like you've trying to be stole it from a building site or something.
Trying to do a one-man tribute act to the village
people. It's like a bad tribute act to the village people. German First World War soldier, builder. No, maybe it's like a village people prototype. It never got off the ground.
But JJ's conditions are that his mother is a frustrated Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen.
Yes, she redecorates his room all the time, doesn't she?
And she's turned at the start, she's turned his room in what can only be described as a public convenience.
Yes, tiled it all, hasn't she?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit rich, isn't it, to say
a bit rich, a lot rich.
Well, it's very rich to do it. But it's a bit rich to start suggesting later on Tom Hanks, these games have driven Tom Hanks mad. And his mum's clearly mad as well, isn't she? I mean, she tiled his room. And then when he goes back later, she's changed it again.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried tiling a bathroom? Let's get Eddie on here. Let's get Ed from his shed, because he's a man, as we know, who tiled his own bathroom. And nearly drove him insane. Never mind a great hall and mazes and monsters. Tiling bloody room drives you insane.
Yeah, when we see the same room later, it's been turned into like a 40s theme pub, hasn't it, or something with directors' chairs and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's JJ character. Yeah. He's the one who is the influencer, isn't he? And then there's I don't know his name, but he has like a.
He looks like Fred from Scooby Doo.
He does, yeah.
I don't know his name, but he looks like Fred from Scooby Doo.
Got a very solid blonde fringe, doesn't he?
Blonde hair, yeah.
And then there's Kate.
Kate.
Who looks old enough to be the mother's.
Old enough to be mother, yeah. Yeah, she does, doesn't she?
She's got a Joni from Happy Days thing going on, but a bit older.
Yeah. Older Joni.
And when we're introduced to Robbie, it's through his parents. His Dad's very strict.
Dad's very strict, and Mum has a drink problem.
Yeah.
You know, and of course we all wonder why. Why does she have a drink problem? But of course later on we find out about the missing brother.
Yeah.
It makes sense, doesn't it? All right.
I think she has a line that says, it's like something from the 40s, like, and that's why I drink in the day.
That's why I drink. Yeah, that's right. Something to do with him. That's why I drink, you know. Okay. Justification for it.
I made a note of that.
Made a note of that excuse.
Yeah.
Use that one.
And so these people converge at this fictional university on the edge of town, unspecified. We don't know where it is, do we?
No. Could be New York, could be New England.
Could be
it's got that kind of New Englandy kind of
Yeah.
thing going on, hasn't it? But, you know.
But with a mine right next to it.
Yeah. Some caves next to it where you could just go in, apparently, and get lost. Yeah.
And
really film about the dangers of potholing.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, that's one of the issues. Potholing, isn't it? Health and safety, yeah.
And so they come together and they have this game. They put a notice on the... And he doesn't want to do it, does he? Tom Hanks, Robbie.
No, he's done it before, hasn't he? They kind of allude to the idea, or suggest that he's done it before and it's landed him in trouble. Because his dad says on the way in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, no, stupid games, you know.
Yeah, and we've all been there, haven't we?
We've
all been there.
Yeah.
He's probably, missed a few exams or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, he reluctantly, but he makes a mistake of telling him that he's 9th level.
That's right, yeah. There's this discussion about, you're 9th level too.
You're 9th level?
9th level. There you go.
Yeah. We don't know what that means, but...
Well, it means also, if they were all 3rd level and he was 9th level and he wasn't prepared to play a 3rd level character, he's getting balanced the party and the whole thing. You're not going to play with him anyway.
Now, when they come to play the game, it's quite elaborate, isn't it? They have all the candles out. Lots of candles.
Yeah.
And these figurines that they use. And the table is like a board, isn't it? It's like...
Yes, it does look like it does look like a board game, doesn't it? That's the interesting thing about it. Because obviously going back to what we were saying earlier about people being puzzled about role-playing, one of the people puzzled by the fact there's no board is one of the classics. So what would you play around the board? No, there's no board. But actually they do put a board there as if it's a board game.
Yeah.
And you think, well, you got that wrong, haven't you?
And so the fellow with the fringe... He's the maze controller.
That's right.
And that's a good name for a GM, I think.
Yeah.
Maze controller.
But don't they have this weird thing where... And again, this is part of the thing about them trying to suggest it's sinister and failing to suggest it's sinister. Doesn't he have some speech where he says, I am a god or some all-powerful god or something like that?
Yeah.
Some speech about... I imagine you warmed to that.
Yes, I did.
But but he makes some speech about being an all-powerful god of the dungeon or something like that, doesn't he? Which is a bit peculiar thing to say, you know.
The whole setup of it reminded me very much of the approach that Kevin used to play, that we used to play with his wife, because they used to put candles out, didn't they?
Yeah.
And used to get disappointed when we didn't respond. To requests, because that's what they do, don't they?
Yeah, they'll start talking in a funny way, don't they?
Yeah. The Reviators are overtaking the Gorvilles, and they talk like that, don't they? And that's how they wanted to play it. So I was thinking maybe they saw Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah, it could have been, couldn't it? Do the voices.
Say
it as you would say it.
Yeah. Aye. But it's not good enough, is it, doing it that way?
No.
And there is what I now call the Ben Elton rule. And the Ben Elton rule, do you know what it is?
It's something that we don't dress up or do dress up.
Do dress up.
Do dress up.
So it's a truth universally acknowledged that if role-playing games appear on any form of media...
You have to cover the people who dress up.
Yeah. You've got to move at some point...
Yeah.
You've got to dress up because it looks boring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even if you got candles.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? That goes back to the Ray Godwin video and all those kind of things. You know, Ray Godwin, who's now Is he an Elvis impersonator now?
Yeah, he is.
Something like that, isn't he?
Do you dress up?
Yeah. Do you dress up as Elvis? Yeah, you do, don't you? Anyway, it's that odd thing that, like you say, the media's desire to portray it as very, very weird or very, very sinister or whatever. And yet, in actual fact, everyone involved in it is not weird or sinister. And ordinary people might just don't really understand it, think it's a bit funny, but that's about as far as it goes. But the media's got this desire to, no, put someone in a wizard's hat on, for God's sake.
So they dress up and go into these caves that he's discovered.
Yeah.
For some reason. I think he wanted to, I don't know, cry for help when he discovered these caves. He goes down them. And you have to say, it's a pretty elaborate setup. It's a bit like a treasure trap, isn't it?
It's elaborate, isn't it? It's a business opportunity there, really. Isn't it?
A skeleton descends from nowhere with a torch in its mouth.
Yeah.
Looks fantastic.
But again, kind of funny because if the film, and I don't think the film does a good job of this, but if the film is trying to suggest that these games could drive you insane, it's LARPing that drives them insane. Yeah. Isn't it? It's not the game. It's not the round the turn. There's a great divide between the LARPers and the non-LARP. It's going to go, see, there you go. It's LARPing that drives you mad, isn't it? Not what we do. We don't do that. Oh, no.
I think they're mixing up satanism with basic health and safety risks. Just take more care. But it's in these caves, isn't it, where Robbie has his first...
Yeah, his first episode. His episode, yeah.
Where the Gorville appears.
The Gorville, yeah.
And it looks like a cross between Orville and a snake, isn't it?
Like a scary Orville. Yeah.
And he stabs the Gorville, which is relevant because the Gorville's not really there.
That's right.
But he has a knife.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to jump ahead a bit now. Because then it goes on for a bit too long, doesn't it?
Well, he has like dreams and stuff, doesn't he?
He dreams.
Gradually ends up going walkabout, doesn't he? And disappears, doesn't he? And they think he's in the caves, but it doesn't, does he? He goes to New York, that's wandering around thinking he's a priest on a holy mission.
Yeah, Purdue.
Yeah, Pardue or something.
Pardue
is his name. Yeah.
And he sets out to New York. And there's a few too many scenes of him wandering through Times Square. Yeah. And I was kind of spotting, I saw where Empire Strikes Back was on.
Yeah, the cinema.
The cinema. Anyway, he's wandering.
Ironic that such a bad film could reference such a good one. There we go.
And he's wandering through. And it's a bit like, I think I said to you, it's a bit like a cross between Big and Travis Bickle. Wandering through the streets.
Big meets Taxi Driver.
Yeah. He's wandering through. I suppose with an expression that can only be described as a bit dumbfounded.
Yeah,
a bit
puzzled. Yeah. Dumbfounded, yeah.
He probably tapped into that when he did Forrest Gump, that kind of look of... a kind of a distance between what's going on in the world around him. And he ends up in a back street, doesn't he? And he sees a Gorville.
Yes, he's attacked by a Gorville, but it's not a Gorville,
It's a mugger.
It's a mugger, yeah.
Early 80s mugger.
Yeah.
And stabs him.
Yeah.
Is that before or after he sees the old man who says he's the king? It's like
I think afterwards he meets the old homeless man, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, who says he's the king. So some gets confused about he's the king. He thinks he's a king and, gets confused. But it's all a bit boring because you just think, he's just confused wandering around.
Yeah, anyway, he gets to the top of the World Trade Center. They intervene.
Yeah. Weird seeing the World Trade Center. That's a weird thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? But they intervene and stop him. He's about to climb over the side or something. So I'm not quite sure why. But, Yeah,
because that, as well as being his brother's name, that was the Great Hall. There's like a revelation, isn't it? They realise the Great Hall, it's the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
Because it had a hall.
Yeah.
So,
I think as a viewer, those revelations are not quite as exciting as they could be. Because at that point you would be a bit bored, aren't you? You've switched off a bit. I found it hard to concentrate on.
Yeah.
Because it's boring, quite boring.
That middle bit is a bit too long, isn't it? A bit too long. Right, we get the idea.
Well, it's boring, and yet in a way that's the meat of the film, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, the whole film is about someone who plays these games and goes mad, thinks he's a cleric, but then when he's doing all that, it's a bit boring.
Yeah. Anyway, he gets talked down, and his friends help him, don't they? They help him get a moment of clarity.
Yeah.
And and then it kind of fades, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then there's a bit of a coda at the end.
Yeah, like the epilogue bit where they go and visit him, don't they? And you think he's going to be all right, but of course he's not.
He's not, because he's wearing very tight tennis shorts.
He is in he looks like John McEnroe. So not only is he dressed as a cleric, he's dressed as a 1970s John McEnroe as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
Which is an odd choice of. Who did the costuming for it? What's that about?
And so he greets them, doesn't he?
Yeah, as Purdue. He still thinks he's Purdue, doesn't he? He's still in that world, isn't he? But, you know.
And they could have said, oh no, he's getting a relapse. But they don't, do they?
No, they haven't.
Aye.
Aye, shall we play again? Aye, yeah, play again. No,
play again.
Play again for the last time. For the last time. Whatever that's supposed to mean.
Yeah.
It's odd that at the end of the last time. As if like, what are you suggesting? Why is it the last time you're playing?
Yeah. So there you go. Mazes and Monsters. We watched it, so you don't have to.
Yeah, and believe me, don't bother, because it is a bad film. It's a bad film, but it's interesting that it doesn't kind of really take off the idea that these games are terrible. Even in the film, it doesn't really achieve that, does it? You don't really come away going, oh yeah, they played this game, it drove him mad. No, I know his brother going missing. That's what it was, the trauma of it all. No, you know. He did have an issue there, you know.
Well, maybe for the sequel.
The sequel. Good God. No.
Appendix G! Welcome to Appendix G, a curated list of interesting stuff created by the Grog Squad. One of the longest serving members of the Grog Squad is Clarky the Cruel, aka Kehaar. Hello there, Clarky.
Hello, Dirk.
I think you were one of our first advocates on a podcast because you used to run Dissecting Worlds. What was interesting about that podcast is a little bit what we're talking about today, isn't it? It's taking some of those tropes and familiar places and ideas and transforming them and playing around with them. You've been developing a campaign, haven't you, around Doctor Who and a specific area of Doctor Who. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my favourite era of Doctor Who is the John Pertwee era, specifically when he was stranded on Earth. And he was running around doing Venusian Aikido, making gadgets in a workshop and being patronising to people in authority with a load of jump-suited, British Army fatigued guys in an organisation called the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, who, in the Pertwee stories, were often, besides the three named characters and a companion, cannon fodder. Now, it's not actually an original idea of mine. Years and years ago, a bunch of mates of mine were running stuff using Call of Cthulhu, where people played members of UNIT when the Doctor wasn't around. And we had all kinds of weird stories, some set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and rotating GMs. In the aftermath of the award-winning Tenerife campaign, I'm running it with... just as a very open thing. So on Monday nights in my regular group, me, Matt or the Grampus, Andy Horton or Thet Butch are all taking turns running scenarios. We've all got like 2 characters each, so we can chop and change what characters we play. I believe some knobhead from Bolton has run something set around John Lennon's Long Weekend. But there's a number of other GMs who have got things in development, so it's just a nice setting, because people understand the basic tropes and cliches behind it, you can do other interesting things with it. So Andy's most recent scenario was to do with an alien weapon that was lost, and we were trying to track down the alien weapon on this area of Wolverhampton. And it was a lot like the Professionals episode, The Gun, when a weapon goes missing and the agents are trying to find it before it does harm. The current one I'm doing, I've kind of made up a fictional country, and it's got a bit of a James Bond aspect because they've gone overseas and they're undercover and things. So you can play around with a lot of different stuff.
Great that it emerged, really, the initial idea in the Pertwee era from restrictions imposed on it by budgetary constraints, because he wasn't able to go around planets because they had cut the budget to it. So they stuck him on Earth for a period of stories. And some of those stories are really inventive, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, you've got Inferno, say, where they go to a parallel universe, which I know now every series does that all the time. You know, they go to Inferno and there's a parallel universe, and the Brigadier and all them, the unit regulars, are members of a fascist force. It's implied that Britain fell to the Nazis, and this is like the post. And what happens with the incident they're dealing in our world, or the Doctor's reality, it goes horribly wrong because these fascists aren't listening to scientific advice. They're able to do things with like prehistory. So the Silurians and the Sea Devils, which are these prehistoric characters, very much echoing themes of, and I don't know if this was deliberate, but say H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, of these primordial pre-human species that had the planet before or someone have it again, although in a pulpier Doctor Who more tea time friendly form. So yeah, they really played around with a lot of stuff. They had commentary on environmentalism, and they have the gorgeousness of Robin Delgado chewing any scenery that was in size as the master as well. But the thing about that budgetary restrictions, I think that was because they went to colour from black and white. I think it was also because the special effects technology was moving on so much. So when they did special effects, it was a bigger cost for them. And also the inflation in the 70s. Not that anyone today knows what inflation is like. So that all added to that impetus to being more inventive than perhaps they had in the past.
What strikes me about it is that the stories had to come to the Doctor rather than him discovering them. In some ways, that's what lends itself to the role-playing setup, doesn't it?
I'm a big fan of mission-based campaigns. I mean, I know I've done sandbox-based stuff, but even when you're doing a sandbox, it's good to have a clear idea, ideally generated by the players, of what they're doing. So I think if you've got this thing that you are investigating whatever agency you might have originally come from, it's the same concept as Delta Green, basically, except it's got a Brian Nylon shirt and you're driving a Ford Cortina, investigating this stuff and trying to protect the Earth and keep the lid on it from a view of public panic. That's quite an easy box for a player character to think they're in. And there's also quite a lot of flexibility with that. So you can have some characters who are maybe a bit more ruthless or brutal. You can have some characters who are much more by the book and respectful of the rules. You can have scientists, you can have action men, you can have drunken ex-tabloid journalists who are now press officers for the Department of Administrative Affairs and like schmooze people to get information. So you can you can bring in all those tropes from the period, television, comics, films as well.
And we should say this period of Doctor Who's time, it was the height of the moral panic about it, wasn't it? The moral guardians were up in arms about it.
For John Pertwee going into Tom Baker, I mean, I know certainly there was a consideration, but it was too scary for kids. I can't remember the name of the story, but it's the one where he's running around in the Matrix and Tom Baker's drowned at the end of an episode, or appears to be drowned at the end of the episode. And for Mary Whitehouse, it was the great moral campaign at the time. And we've actually got an NPC based on her in the unit campaign that Matt wrote up, because we've got a list of, on my blog, a list of NPCs people have written up, which are there for people to steal. But she made a big thing about that and the general grotesqueness of the monsters. And some of them were really effective. In my mind's eye, my earliest Doctor Who memory, and it might not be the earliest, but it's the one that stuck, is when the Jaggerath is unmasked at the end of City of Death. And it can't be when it was first shown because I would have been too little to remember it. But that sort of tentacly face with the single eye, when the human in a disco shit, in a sort of John Travolta disco suit of the Count, that really, really stuck in my memory. Compared to what's on Rick and Morty or whatever now, it's fairly anodyne.
And we're talking about moral panics in this episode. And we've been saying that we were untouched, really, by the role-playing moral panic. But you were directly affected, weren't you?
Yes. So in another Fish Fingers moment, I naively decided, let's form a games club. Now, that met at a local secondary school. It didn't last very long. It lasted a few months because at the same time, a bunch of LARPers found out we had a games club, turned up and showed off their rubber weapons. And then we'd lost half our membership to go tracing round Wirral Country Park in North Wales, whacking each other with latex. So, we were kind of sabotaged there. We formed this club. And then out of the blue, and I think the first incidence of it coming to my attention was in the Daily Post, which was Liverpool's daily morning newspaper. Liverpool used to have two newspapers, the Liverpool Echo in the evening and the Daily Post in the morning. And it was on the centre spread, but it was at the bottom of the page, just like an inch or two. But there was a thing covering a vicar saying, this is a dangerous game and blah, blah, blah. Vicar from New Brighton, danger in children's fun, blah, 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 blah. That then got picked up by the Wirral Globe, who put me on their front cover. And me, having excellent spin doctor advice, decided to stand on the front cover, wearing all black and a very grim expression with my shaven face. If only I'd thought to do the old Aleister Crowley freeway thing, if I was aware of it then, which I don't think I was. Holding a copy of the DC Heroes Watchmen supplements in one hand. And I can't remember what was in the other. It might have been a Sheba. Fantasy Masters of Sheba, Greek Africa. But anyhow, he said his bit, I said my bit. And then years ago, a mate found it on photofilm the library and kindly photocopied it and shared it, so we've got it captured for prosperity. I think also there was a little exchange on, it wasn't Roger Phillips, I think it was Tony Snell that was doing it, but like the tea time phone-in thing on Radio Merseyside as well, because I was the sort of precocious child who'd come home at lunchtime and dial into that and devil give out my opinions.
So a poster boy for Satanism in the Wirral.
I was a poster boy for what probably explains the lack of take-up of Satanism in the general North Wirral area. Yeah, so it was a dark thing, but I didn't have my house burnt. My mum didn't lose her job or anything. It was I had the Mickey taken at me at school, and but I was used to that. And fun and games.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Clarky. And I'll have to come to your Monday group and run my Lost Weekend sequence for you.
Yeah, do that. That'd be cool.
I'll get me coat.
Well, this time next week, Blythy, we'll be in that there Leicestershire.
Leicestershire. Is it Leicestershire or Warwickshire?
It's Leicestershire, I think.
Shire, Warwickshire. Shire, Warwickshire.
Oh, wait, we're going to rugby. First time I've ever been to a rugby.
Yeah.
So, better explain. We're going down and we're in a big house with...
I hope it's a big house.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot
of us there. I hope it is a big house. It might not be a big house.
Yeah. There's about... How many is there? There's about 12 of us, is there?
No, there's 14.
14. Yeah. 14. And it's the One Ring road trip. It's something that's gone on for a number of years where they go away and they play Tolkien games with the One Ring. And I thought it would be a good idea to do a rival one, a Moorcock Weekend.
Yeah, it's like a Moorcock.
A moonbeam road trip, no less. And put forward the idea that we did it at the same time. And then I thought it'd be good if we were in neighbouring properties, so then we could have a water fight in the garden. That could still happen. And then we ended up having a big house together. Yeah. So this time next week, that's where we'll be.
That's where we'll be this time next week. It'll be interesting. If nothing else.
If nothing else. You've managed to bag the palatial suite. I'm on a camp bed.
Yeah, no, it's all a bit of a misunderstanding. I just thought it was a single room going, but I thought, oh yeah, I'll have that then. Thanks.
You won't let me come in with my soap and a rope and use your bathroom, will you?
Does it have its own bathroom?
I think it does.
Does
yeah.
it?
Yeah, you
Does
have got.
it?
Yeah.
Blimey.
Yeah. So I'm coming in with me soap and a rope.
Oh, you're not. No, it's a private bathroom. Tunnel lawn.
Tunnel lawn. Yeah. I'm in the city of the beggars.
Yeah, you're not soaker, aren't you?
Yeah.
Everybody else. Yeah. Camp bed. Do feel a bit guilty, but not guilty enough to relinquish. Sorry.
So we're going to be playing Moorcocking games. We're going to start with Elric at the End of Time, which is a board game produced by KSE back in the 70s. So I'm quite looking forward to having a go at that.
Yep.
Can't get my head around the rules. I'm hoping that Mark
will be able to explain it.
Yeah, he'll be able to work it out. Because he's our wargaming thing.
Yeah.
I once threw him out of a balloon, but I regret that decision because he.
Yeah. He's a good sort of source of rules. See, people talk about rules lawyers, but so you need someone like that, don't you? At the table who can just look at them and they'll go, oh yeah, well it's -20 or something.
Yeah.
They know.
Yeah.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
I used to think I was a rules lawyer, but I'm not really. By comparison, I'm an amateur.
Mark will sort it out.
Yeah.
Then we've got a quiz in the evening, so I've got to sort that out.
Sort quiz out, yeah.
I'm going to do it as Jerry Cornelius' House of Games. I've got some ideas on how to do that. And then in the morning, I'm doing my adaptation of Aegon with the Eternal Champion.
Get you, indie game hack.
I know, yeah.
What's happened to you?
Yeah.
Honey?
Oh, I've changed.
You have changed, haven't you?
Yeah. So perhaps talk about that a little bit later when I've done it, and we'll see whether that works. Then in the afternoon, it's you.
Yeah. DCC, Moorcock, Elric, Young Kingdoms, kind of DCC. I won't say too much about it.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I could do, couldn't I? This will go out after we've been there.
No, it's going out before.
Is it? Oh, right. In that case. And also you're sitting there, so I'm not going to give you any spoilers.
No.
I think kind of it's interesting that neither of us picked Stormbringer. There is actually an Elric role-playing game, but neither of us picked that.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. I mean, we're playing Stormbringer.
Yeah, we're playing it anyway in a different.
I do have a bit of regret that I didn't play Stormbringer because the thing with this hacking thing is that you have to create a game before you create a scenario.
Yeah, I think both the games we've picked, though. I mean, Dungeon Crawl Classics is very Moorcockian in the way it works. It does have a lot of those traits in it that, chaos, gods of chaos and all that kind of thing. And the adventure that I've based it on, or based part of it on, all of it, Intrigue at the Court of Chaos. When you read it, the names have been changed, but you read it, it's very much like an Elric kind of thing, where you get summoned to the Court of Chaos to do something for the Lords of Chaos, that kind of thing. It is very Moorcockian. And Aegon as well, that's the same, isn't it? The idea that you draw on, the gods and Lords of Law, Lords of Chaos, you just switch around the Greek gods and replace them
with chaos.
And Aegon encourages you to do that, doesn't it? One of the appendices to it does encourage you to say, you can just fill in the blanks with different gods.
Yeah.
Run it a different way.
And I wanted to have a go at playing Eternal Champion, so creating aspects of the Eternal Champion that gather together to do this particular story together, because of the published stuff that's out there, it doesn't really allow you to do that. You're playing people in the world of the Young Kingdoms or in the Tragic Millennium, whereas I think it'll be interesting to play champions and do those kind of things on that scale. So I'll be interested to see how it works out. What's on your mind? What's your closing time chatter?
Well, we just finished our first season of Pirates of Drinax, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
We just finished that summer break, and start again in kind of August, September time.
Yeah. It's very good, very entertaining. You did a good job.
Thank you very much. No, it is a very entertaining thing to run as well, and sort of gives you lots of insights into Traveller and how you can run it, because it's a very narrative kind of way of running it, isn't it? It's not. I mean, you could run it at a very granular level where you worrying about every the movement of people and all these kind of detailed combat things. But I think it's a big campaign anyway. It would take forever though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If you did it like that. And I suppose it demonstrates how Traveller lends itself to that, you know. It has a scalable quality to it, Traveller, where you can do it in a more narrative, looser way, or you can do it worrying about ammo, worrying about what weapons, worrying about this, worrying about all the detail. You can do it that way as well for different types of adventures. I realise quite what a flexible system it is, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole setup of the planets, they're very interesting, aren't they? And your mission as player characters is engaging as well, because you're privateers, but you're also working for yourself, trying to sustain yourself, but at the same time trying to further the cause of King Olaf. So as agitators.
Yeah, the idea is that you're kind of trying to restart the Star Dragon Empire that used to exist, and restart and get planets on side. So it's quite clever from that point of view, because you've got all the excitement of pirates and getting money and robbing ships and doing all that, but at the same time you're just about making alliances, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
selling stuff to planets to keep them on side, and creating havens for yourself and alliances that ultimately will coalesce into being this emerging empire, which is great fun, really.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it, and we're creating our own level of mischief as well, aren't we? So
yeah. That's the fun of it. It's fun for a games master, because you don't really know what the player's going to do. There is every scenario, every session we've had, although I've got some ideas there and prepared something, there's always an element of uncertainty and improvisation given what you decide to do as players, which is really, really good, and it keeps it fresh, I suppose.
And like the end of all good seasons, we learn from Charles Dickens, they should end with a death or a marriage, and we had a marriage, didn't we?
You married an android.
I married an android.
You did marry an android. You went to a planet where robots can take a test to gain rights, and she passed the test with flying colours, because she's cleverer than all of you. And you married her, yeah. Brilliant.
In a chapel with a
Robo Elvis. I can imagine.
Oh, it might be Ray Godwin.
Could have been Ray Godwin.
Oh, anyway, Blythy, we better get packing.
Yeah.
We've got a trip to do. See you later.
See you soon.
There isn't another bit.
Thanks to Joe for the interview, and to Clarky for his Appendix G contribution. I'm not going to keep you for long. I'm in need of a Lemsip. So I'll just say Substack, Discord, Book Club and Virtual Grog Meet, and if you head to grognardfiles.com to fill in the blanks. Thanks for listening, and thanks to the patrons old and new for keeping us going. There's more GrogPod goodness coming next month. Pack your gyrojet pistol, because we're exploring new frontiers. Until then, adios amigos.